Happy are those whom God brings near.
We love the goodness of God's holy temple.
By awesome deeds, God delivers us.
God is our hope and our salvation.
God is our strength and our refuge.
Let us shout and sing together for joy. Praise the Lord.
The first hymn is number 390, Spirit of God, descend upon my heart. Please remain standing for the prayer of confession to be read in unison. Sovereign God,
We confess that we have not turned away from sin. We celebrate our achievements and look down on our neighbors. We boast about our virtues and deny the worth of others. Forgive us, God of grace. Be merciful to us. For we are indeed sinners in great need of redemption, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Friends, hear and proclaim the good news.
In Jesus Christ we are forgiven. Thanks be to God.
the second chapter, the 23rd and 24th verse, and the 30th to the 32nd verse, which may be found on page 788. Be glad, O sons of Zion, and rejoice in the Lord your God. For he has given the early rain for your vindication. He has poured down for you abundant rain, the early and the later rain as before. The threshing floors shall be full of grain, the vats shall overflow with wine and the oil. Verses 30 and 32. And I will give portions in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness and the moon to blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. And it shall come to pass that all who call upon the name of the Lord shall be delivered. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be those who escape, as the Lord has said. And among the survivors shall be those whom the Lord calls. The New Testament reading is from Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. And that is on page 911 in the Pew Bible. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank thee that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give the tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to the heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but he who humbles himself will be exalted. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
At this time, we will sing one verse of Jesus Loves Me, so that the children may come down.
I don't know about everyone out there, but today, in today's world, doing things with cups is a big thing with kids. You guys know that? There's all these competitions, and you guys do that, snap them, and do the Chad does. But it can get kind of loud, but it's kind of amazing. Some kids can do these stacks and stuff really fast, and I'm not going to do that today. But I am going to kind of play with some cups over here. To build a tower, because we can build towers with cups, right? Yeah. And what I have written on here is some things, some good things that people do. And like go to church. That's a good thing, right? And give at church. That's a good thing, right? I'm going to try to do this. Sing. Some people can sing really good, right? And because I can't, I really appreciate that. And then read the Bible. Is that a good thing? Some people are really handsome or pretty. That's a good thing, right? And then athletes, people can be very athletic, be very good at that. Yeah. And then be kind to others. That's a good thing. Right? What about listening to your parents? Is that a good thing? Yeah. Oh no! What happened? too many cups that fell over. Well, all of these things are good things, but are those things that people can kind of build themselves up about and maybe start living their lives for instead of doing them for a good purpose, maybe? And what the scripture reading today tells us is that if we kind of do these good things, but we're only doing them for ourselves, eventually they're going to stack up, but what's going to happen is just like our power of cups. Something's going to fall because we're not basing it on anything good like God to do things for other people is a great thing, but if we're doing it so we can go out and brag to other people that we did that and it wasn't to honor God in some way, or to look at someone and go, I'm a great football player, but I'm so glad I'm not like Joe over here who can't even pick up the football. When we start comparing ourselves and placing higher value on those things that we're good at, it's not a good thing. And eventually when we get so far up, something's going to happen and we're going to topple over. And we're going to, you can find God again to help you and start over. But just keep that in mind that whenever we go around, and it's great to be good at things, but whenever we go around, just remember that we have those gifts because God gave them to us and we should use them to honor Him. Let's say a prayer. Dear God, help us to use our gifts wisely to honor you. Amen.
I think I was like several of you as we watched that tower going up. I got worried it's not going to make it all the way to the top. Then it fell over. I'm glad to hear it. It was actually part of what you were trying to do. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Made it all the way. All right. I believe most all of you in here, a few of you may not, but most of you have met and know the apple of my eye, the love of my life, my wife Julia. And so I want to begin this morning with a little bit about Julia. If that's okay. It's not too bad because that's how I started. My wife Julia, and she's not here with us on Sunday morning, so she actually plays for a church in Kirkwood, so you don't ever see her on Sunday morning. We have to see her somewhere else. But anyway, Julia rarely watches very much on television. And very rarely will ever take 2 hours to watch a movie on TV, or even to go to a movie, because it's a waste of her time to do that kind of thing. So if she watches a movie, she's very selective about which or what kind of movies that she wants to watch on TV. If she's going to take 2 hours of her time to sit in front of the screen watching something, then it better be entertaining for her and something that she enjoys. And what she really enjoys are romances that have happy endings. So a lot of times we watch movies, if we sit down and watch a movie together, some movie that's like on the Hallmark Channel, because that's pretty much the definition of the movies on the Hallmark Channel. They're romances and they always have happy endings. Anyway, let's move on. A couple of weeks ago, Julia has she has several favorite movies, but two of her favorite movies actually star the same two people, Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. And those two movies, of course, are Sleepless in Seattle and You've Got Mail. Well, it just so happened that every time one of us notices that one of those are going to be on television at some time, we'll say to the other, well, hey, this movie's going to come on, do you think we want to watch it again? But anyway, because I like them also, they're kind of cute, and Tom Hanks was fairly young in those movies, and Meg Ryan was real cute and perky, and they're fun movies to watch, and they have happy endings to them. But anyway, so a couple of weeks ago, I don't remember exactly how long, the Cardinals were still playing at that time, and that night the Cardinals did not have a game, so we were going to watch a movie, and we saw that You've Got Mail comes on. Well, it just so happens that that particular day, I was working on the message for this morning. And I was thinking about that Pharisee and that tax collector. And those things were going through my mind when I sat down to watch that particular movie, You've Got Mail, with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan. If you don't know the movie at all, it's got a little premise where they're emailing back and forth, but they don't know each other. They don't know who's emailing. They using their handles or whatever they call it at that time. So they didn't know who they were emailing back and forth, and that's where the You've Got Mail came from. But the premise of it was there was a small bookstore that was just around the corner. That was the name of the bookstore, actually. And Meg Ryan, her character, owned the bookstore, and her mother had owned the bookstore, and it's a small bookstore in New York City, and it, had been there, sort of a tradition of the city. And this big old wholesale bookseller, Fox Books, was going to put in, like the Barnes & Noble, was going to put in their big bookstore with their coffee bar and all that kind of stuff. So books were sort of a part of a theme of this. And one book that they sort of highlight in this movie, You've Got Mail, that they talked about at different times, and they actually even gave a little bit of the synopsis of this particular book, was Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. They talk about that in the movie. And as I'm watching that movie, I've really never thought about that being in the movie before, but as I thought about that, as they were talking about Pride and Prejudice, and Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet, and who was proud and who was prejudiced, and what's going on in that particular book, I thought, I don't have a title for this message for this Sunday yet. And what that story of the Pharisee and tax collector is all about is pride and prejudice. So, with apologies to Jane Austen this morning, I'm borrowing her title. It really doesn't have anything to do with her book except what I just mentioned to you right now. But I really believe that Jesus is speaking to the issues of pride and prejudice in this story of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And he's not just speaking, of course, to his disciples, the people who were listening to him, but he's speaking to us today as well. And of course, the main character, the one that has the most lines in this particular parable, is the Pharisee. The Pharisee. And he seems to be the subject of that pride and prejudice that's taking place in this particular parable. And just like many of the stories that we hear in the gospel, the Pharisees sort of put in the bad light in this story. He's sort of the bad guy, But I want to remind you who the Pharisees were in the time of Jesus. I've done this before, but I think we need to recall it again as we start thinking about this particular story. The Pharisees were the good religious people of Jesus' time. The Pharisees were the people who read the Scriptures. The Pharisees were the people who knew what it was, how God had spoken to them through the Scriptures. The Pharisees were the people who attended synagogue on a regular basis. The Pharisees were the people who tried to follow the rules, the moral code that they believed God had set down for them to follow in their lifetime. The Pharisees were the people that during their time, people looked at and said, there goes a religious person. There goes a good person. In other words, the Pharisees were people like us, sitting right here this morning. They were the good people, the religious people of their day, who tried to do the right thing as far as they were concerned in the eyes of God. As a matter of fact, the Pharisees were the ones who spent time studying the Scriptures. The Pharisees were more of the theologians of their day, and they had that in common with Jesus Christ as well, who had studied the Scriptures very closely and was quite something of a theologian. That's why he was invited to speak in the synagogues many times, because he obviously was a learned man of the Scripture. He knew something about the Scripture. And where the Pharisees and Jesus really differed is that the Pharisees stuck a lot more to the rule of the law, of what they believed the Scripture said. They said, they read Leviticus. They were familiar with all the rules in Deuteronomy. They were familiar with all the rules that Moses had delivered down to them, and they tried to follow them. They were very much trying to adhere to the rules of their religious and moral code. And Jesus, a lot of times, went outside of that and did a lot of other. He would actually do things against the rules, like healing on the Sabbath. And it got him in trouble a lot of times with the good religious people. But those Pharisees, they were the people they were the ones that people would have pointed to and said, these are the good religious people. These are the people that go to church every Sunday. These are the people that read the Bible. These are the people that pray. These are the people that give to the needy. These are the people that care for their fellow man. the good religious people of their day. The people like us. That's who the Pharisees were. And yet in this parable, the Pharisee is the one that seems to be the subject of pride and prejudice. And I would offer that it is very, very easy for people like us to sometimes put ourselves up a little bit and think, yeah, we are the good people. We're the ones that are here in church on Sunday. There's so many people that aren't here today. They're not going to church on Sunday. We're the ones that give to the church. We're the ones that support the food pantry. We're the ones that do all these things to provide for other people. All those other people aren't necessarily doing that. Well, that's a source of pride, and that's what Jesus is pointing out in this particular parable. He's not just speaking to the Pharisees' pride and prejudice. I think he's speaking directly to our pride and prejudice. So what does this story mean for us today? What does it say to us? What can we take from it when we think about how our own pride and prejudice perhaps gets in the way of who we are called to be as people of God? Shall we pray? Gracious God, may the words of my lips and the meditations of our hearts and minds be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So we got the Pharisee down, I think, understanding a little bit about him. In addition to the Pharisee, the other major character, even though I will contend there's a third character you'll hear about in a minute, the other major character in this parable is the tax collector. In some versions of the Bible, earlier versions, we call it publican. But he was a tax collector. Now, I trust that not too many of us here this morning are especially fond of the Internal Revenue Service. That's just a guess I have. But I would venture to say that today's tax people, those agents of the IRS, and the men and the women that work for the Internal Revenue Service, they're not universally despised and hated in the same way that the tax collectors of Jesus' time were. Because we're not talking at that time about a benign or a bureaucratic government employee who was just simply doing their job, but the tax collector of Jesus' day was a collaborator with the occupying enemy, the Roman Empire. They were people who lived among you who collaborated with the Roman Empire, the enemy, the ones who are oppressing you. And as contractors for the Roman Empire, tax collectors were free to exact payment in whatever manner they saw fit. Whether that was strong arm or whatever. They were getting the money from you that you owed to the Roman Empire. And they were allowed to charge extra amounts to you over and above what the Roman Empire required from you as a way of receiving compensation for themselves, for the job that they were doing for the Roman Empire. So they inflated the amounts due to the Roman Empire so that they'd have commissions for themselves. I mean, that's the way the system was set up to work. By definition, then, tax collectors were wealthy at this particular time in history. And most people believed they were dishonest. They're cheating me out of, they want so much money, they're cheating. That's just not fair. In other words, they were almost seen as being extortionists. They required you to pay so much money. And of course, if you didn't do it, the Roman soldiers could come down upon your head. And also, as handlers of money and agents of a Gentile occupying empire, by Jewish law, tax collectors were ritually unclean as well. Well, they had a lot going against them as far as what people thought of them as tax collectors, but they were fellow Jews in Jesus' society. They were local people, a Jew, in the society. And that's probably about all that the tax collectors and the Pharisees had in common. They were both Jews. And I think that's probably how a tax collector and a Pharisee happened to find themselves in the synagogue together praying in this parable that Jesus recounts for us. And the tax collector, of course, he was fully aware of his shameful status among all the other Jews that would be praying and worshiping there in the synagogue and the temple. And he stood alone, off in the shadows. He was too caught up in his own prayer to worry about anybody else that was there, and he didn't notice anything else in his surroundings that day. But notice, not so the Pharisee. The Pharisee knew exactly who was there in the synagogue. He was observant. He was so observant that the tax collector even wound up in the Pharisee's prayer. If you remember, he said, God, I thank you that I'm not like other people. I'm not thieves, rubes, adulterers. I'm not like that tax collector over there. Pharisee went on to say, I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all my income. Pretty impressive. This most religious, good person, this Pharisee. And he was just recounting all those things that he was doing in his prayer. So not only was he praying, but he really was boasting, wasn't he, about what a good person he was. Meanwhile, the tax collector was filled with shame for all that he had done and that he had been. And he couldn't even bring himself to look up to the heavens, to look up to God. He was just looking down at his feet, glued to the ground. And he beat on his chest like a person who might have been mourning a loved one, and he said, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. And God, recognizing his contrition and humility as being sincere, he sent him home justified. End of story. All right? Wait a minute. Let's look at it a little more closely. I actually fell into the trap that Jesus seemed to set in this parable when I read this parable, and almost every time I read this parable. By any chance, did you do that? Did you find yourself, when you read this parable and listen to me going through the parable again, did you find yourself condemning the Pharisee for judging other people in his prayer? The tax collector and all those other sinners? Did you condemn him for bragging and taking all the credit for his own piety and his own good character, for being a good religious person? It's hard not to judge him, isn't it? I mean, he's pompous, he's presumptuous in this particular parable, and he doesn't give God, or at least his mentors or his parents or his family or somebody, credit for his accomplishments. No, it's all him. He didn't even know this tax collector. He just saw him, and he knew of him as a tax collector, and he put that tax collector in the same category as thieves, as rubes, as adulterers. And he used his prayers as a platform for condemning other people, for lifting himself up. That really takes some nerve. But wait a minute, wait. I just judged the Pharisee again, didn't I? We're judging the Pharisee when we think that way. Basically, there's no way out of this parable without taking Jesus' bait, finding ourselves playing the Pharisee's game, judging and taking a self-righteous pose against that Pharisee that was proud and prejudiced. As much as we'd like to believe that we're really, at heart, the earnest tax collector in this story, it's impossible to not be critical of the Pharisee. So in this parable, it's a pretty neat trick that Jesus pulls on us as listeners. And supposedly this parable would work even better if it's updated with who might be a Pharisee or who might be a tax collector of our day. And I do this sometimes in my messages, I got to admit. Somebody might recommend, well, instead of using a Pharisee, we don't have Pharisees today, why don't we put a bishop? Maybe let's put the Pope in there. instead of the Pharisee, and maybe we could have a terrorist there, not a tax collector, but a terrorist, those terrible terrorist people. We could update the story with those guys. But if we do that, isn't that a judgment trap that we're falling into again? Because we're still not peering within our own hearts. And I think that's what Jesus is asking us to do, challenging us to do in this particular parable. We're not supposed to use our own pride and our own prejudice to find bad people in this story. Because anytime we find an other, anytime we identify some other as a bad person or somehow other than us, we're not only distancing ourselves from that person, we're also distancing ourselves from God. It's hard not to do, and it's quite a quandary, particularly for us good religious people. And this quandary reminds me of a daily devotional piece that I ran across when I was in seminary. It's written by an Illinois pastor. Her name is Reverend Lillian Daniel. And it made quite an impression on me. So I want to read it. I'm going to read the whole thing. It takes just a minute to read, but listen carefully to what she says. In a way, it's a more updated version of this parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. It goes like this, and I quote, "I am tired of hearing people say stupid things in the name of Christianity. I am tired of nutty pistol-packing pastors who want to burn the Quran. I am tired of televangelists who claim that natural disasters are somehow the will of God. I am tired of Christians who respond to the pain of disease with some kind of lecture about good and bad behavior. I am tired of preachers who promise prosperity. I'm also tired of people who say that they're privately spiritual, but they're not religious. I'm tired of those people who've had one bad experience with the church and they paint the whole of Christianity with that same brush. And I'm really tired of celebrities who criticize the church for being patriarchal and homophobic, but they do nothing to support those churches that are not. I'm tired of people who say they want a church like ours, but they can't be bothered to attend one. And I'm real tired of people who criticize churches like ours and then don't go anywhere else. Sometimes I feel like I live in a society where the stupid and the simple in spirituality always seem more religious than those of us searching the depths of a complex faith. We are a people of itchy ears who depart from sound doctrine in favor of easy answers. But then perhaps I am really just tired of myself. Because in criticizing others in their faith, I'm hardly living up to be the best in my own faith. Perhaps the people who irritate me the most are those who are exposing my own false doctrines. End quote. And I would add, perhaps those who irritate me the most are the ones who expose my own pride and prejudice when it comes to faith and religion. And the first time that I read that reflection through, that devotion, I found myself getting riled up. Yeah, me too. I'm tired of those kinds of people. After each sentence I'd say, yeah, I'm sick of that too. I'm tired of those kind of people. Only to run up against those last few statements and to have my judgments turned around on me again, pointing that finger back to me. Yeah, I'm a self-righteous finger pointer sometimes, maybe way too often. My pride and my prejudice affect my thoughts and affect my actions every day. And my brand of arrogance is just as unbecoming and divisive as anyone else's. even the Pharisees in this parable. So it's so difficult for us as human beings to not fall into the Pharisees' trap, I'll call it, in this parable. I think I may have recounted this story to you once before, but I want to share it with you again. A colleague of mine in seminary, she learned of a special ministry that was taking place in New Orleans where women who were former prostitutes are given opportunities to work and live outside of that degrading lifestyle, given a new chance on life. They lived in a home there with other former prostitutes, and they worked in a business right next door where they create soaps and perfumes and lipsticks and other personal use items, and they sell those to support themselves. Now, Margaret Ann, my seminary colleague, she's now a pastor in Illinois, a Methodist pastor, unfortunately, but that's all right. She's a pastor in Illinois. She became very interested in this ministry. So interested that she actually traveled to New Orleans one summer and spent several weeks, almost 3 months, living and working in that ministry that was taking place there. And Margaret Ann discovered that the women who lived and worked there were so open and welcoming that she began to feel like one of them. And the more they spoke of their own pain, of their struggles, of relationships that they'd had in life, the more she saw kindred spirits that she was living among, and realized there was really a very fine line between those women and her. These were sensitive people, just like Margaret Ann. They had crossed a line that her own circumstances just happened to be able to steer her clear of in her lifetime. So as she worked and lived with these women, she felt proud to be associating with these women who were turning their lives around, and they were doing it because of a ministry, because of a love for God. Their focus now was on God, and it was on God's kingdom. And it had completely turned their lives around. And Margaret Ann was so proud to be a part of that. So proud, in fact, that she was instrumental in starting a ministry similar to that now in St. Louis. But after Margaret Ann had been down in New Orleans for a couple of weeks, she went with a few of those women to an open-air bazaar they had, and they were selling some of their wares there. They were always looking for new ways to market their goods and their products. And as Margaret Ann was there working and displaying the goods and talking with the customers, well, the customer just casually asked Margaret Ann how long she had been involved in prostitution. Margaret Ann immediately responded, "Oh, I'm not one of them. I've never been a prostitute." And as soon as the words had come out of her mouth, she knew she was the Pharisee in this parable. She was a seminary student with a heart for this life-changing ministry, so much so that she was going and living there, but without thinking, she had set herself above these women that she had been living with for the last couple of months. Oh, how easy it is for us to set ourselves in judgment of other people. How easy it is to allow our pride and our own prejudice to influence our thoughts and our actions. And I really believe this is a lesson we have to learn over and over and over and over again in our lifetimes. Because at that moment, when we think we've learned the lesson, when we see our own brokenness clearly, and we experience humility, then the process has to start all over again, because that humility itself becomes a point of pride. And sort of a measuring stick. Look how humble I am. Yet another trap of our own pride and our prejudice against others. So, Pastor Steve, you're going, "Oh, well, this all seems like bad news. Where do we go from here? With such deep divisions between peoples today, such deep divisions and problems between nations around this world today. Such deep divisions and problems in our own country between political parties. Such deep divisions and problems between religious factions and religious groups in our world, in our society today. We need answers. We need answers now, more than ever. Well, I think we can learn a thing or two from the tax collector and from the former prostitutes that Margaret Ann worked with. Keeping the focus on God That's the key. We have to keep our focus on God. If all of our capabilities and all of the things that we do, all of our accomplishments, anything that we are doing or saying in our lives, if those all point toward the giver of life and justice, and we realize that from God all things come, not from ourselves, then there's no room for comparisons, because there's no comparison to God. Because God is all. No unfavorable comparison can be made in any other place, because it's not about us. It's not about us. It's about God. Okay. Now that sounds like a pretty smart thing for Pastor Steve to say, but wait a minute. Really, it is about us. Isn't it? I mean, we're the ones sitting here this morning. You know, it's about us. Jesus gave this parable to us. So it is actually in some ways about us. So equally important in keeping our focus on God is remaining open and remaining aware of what it is that we ultimately share with all other people. And I mean all other people, not just those good people, those people that are like us. I mean what we share with all other people. We share our humanity. We share our brokenness. We share our fallibilities, because none of us are perfect. We share our desire for love and for approval. And there comes that pride that we've got to be careful with. But all human beings share those things. And in the grand scheme of things, we need to realize that we are okay. Hey, we're children of God. But remember, we're all children of God. Even the tax collectors, even the terrorists are children of God. And you know, we can't do the healing work for the tax collector or for the terrorist. We can only do our own healing work with God's help. With God's help, we have to focus on our own healing work. And God will take care of the rest. But while we're at it, perhaps we can replace some of those ideas about condemnation, some of those ideas about keeping up with the Joneses, some of those ideas about competing with other people. We can replace those things with compassion for other people. Compassion for all others. And let's just see where that takes us. Let's see where that takes us. We just might discover that our passions, our hopes, and our dreams have a whole lot more in common with all other people than we think. Compassion, love. That should be our focus. When we say keep our focus on God, what does that mean? I think that means that compassion and love should be the center of who we are, and not our pride, and not our own thoughts about others. And just one more thing. Within the parable, we didn't learn what happened to the tax collector after he returned home justified. It just said he went home justified. Okay? But I'd like to assume that, and perhaps you would too when you think about this, that out of his gratitude to God and his sense of healing as he's working on his own healing, that he was moved to action somehow. And specifically, I hope that he took some action from that point on behalf of those whom he and his patron, the Roman Empire, had harmed in the past. You know, and I think those people are the invisible third character in this story. Those people that get damaged, that get harmed because of our own pride and prejudice that we carry around with us, that we allow to control our own thoughts and action. I hope that acting out of compassion in his heart now, this tax collector was able to help those poor and needy. many of them in his time would have been, of course, poor farmers. And they couldn't have afforded his price gouging as far as the taxes were concerned because they were basically destitute. And of course, we have them among us still, the poor and the needy, those who are destitute, those who have to depend upon others to survive. And I think that our healing, our own healing, will ever be incomplete without their healing being accomplished as well. So, my friends, I say that our pride and our prejudice should turn to compassion, because it's about all of us in this world. All of us and God. Amen. Let us now respond to our words this morning by rising either in body and spirit and singing our hymn of response, which is I Am Thine, O Lord, number 552 in the hymn. So we rise and sing. You may be seated. And please join with me now in that affirmation of faith of the Christian Church that we call the Apostles' Creed. I believe in God, Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Ghost, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, dead, and buried. He descended into hell. The third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven, and sitteth on the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From
thence he shall come to judge the quick and the dead. I believe on the Holy Ghost, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen.
As we believe, as we make that affirmation of faith, we know that we are called to do what we can do to help continue to establish the kingdom of God upon this earth. And so now we have an opportunity to give back, to share of the many ways in which we have been blessed. So as our ushers come forward this morning, be generous in your giving. Lord Jesus, you truly are our all in all. Worthy is your name. We ask now that these tokens we present to you be used throughout this community, throughout this world, to help further your kingdom and reach all those who need to hear your worthy name. This we ask in your name. Amen. Let us now pause for just a moment of silence as we prepare our hearts and minds for prayer. Shall we pray? We turn to you, Almighty God, on this beautiful fall day, and we give you thanks for the wonder and the beauty of creation, for for the changing seasons, for the freshness of each and every day. Thank you for these wonderful gifts bestowed upon us. We thank you also for this house of worship, this bright and beautiful sanctuary, which provides us a place to worship each week. We also thank you for family, for friends, for all those who touch our lives in a special way each week. And we especially give thanks for your presence here among us, gracious God. We can feel your Spirit. We experience your love as we gather here today. And now we ask this day that our feelings, our experience of your love be shared by all those who are in need. We ask that you be with those who are ill and hurting. Be with those who suffer from emotional pain. Be with those who live in the fear of violence. Be with those who are lonely. Be with those who must try to go to sleep tonight with an empty stomach. Be with all those who truly are in need. Care for them. Lighten their burdens and bless them this day. Continue to be with us as we now repeat the prayer Jesus taught us, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Let us rise one last time, either in body or spirit, and sing together our closing hymn, which this day is Father, I Adore You, number 191 in your hymn. Shall we rise and sing? And next Sunday we're going to return here for just tricks. Just treats, no tricks. I hope I don't confuse that when I'm playing this. No. It is no tricks, just treats. Bonus Sunday next Sunday, and I hope to see you all here. But whether you're here or not, and whatever you're doing this week, remember, the thing to remember is to keep your focus on God. To turn that pride and prejudice which wells up out of us so easily to compassion. To compassion, because God is compassion. God is love. Regardless of where you are and whatever you're doing, God is right there with you as well. Because God is always above us. God is always below us. God always goes behind us. God always comes before us. God is always standing right beside us. And most importantly of all, God is always right inside us as well. So go in peace this week, my friends. Amen.